actually read any of our books or websites? I'd like to see hands. Okay, again, how many people have not? Not too many. Well, you know. So I feel like for those of you who haven't, that I need to make, you know, a little bit of background information that probably will, you know, everybody else will know, but for the sake of those people who don't know, hopefully you will forgive me for doing a little recapitulation. A lot of you know, who are familiar with our websites and our work, that we are living under a little bit of pressure right now because we've got the French police investigating us for the accusation is being a cult. You know, I hope that all of y'all realize that the people that read our websites and read our books are probably the last people who can be considered, you know, cult followers, because the main thing we encourage is people to think for themselves and to investigate, and of course, the scientific method. So, I've actually been accused of using my powers of hypnosis to mind control people. So, just warning you, you know, you've got a Svengali here, and you better be really careful because I'm going to put you all in a trance and, you know. But anyway, yeah, we made a trip up to Paris to engage an attorney last week. And when we let him know what was going on, we took him all our documents and so forth. You know, you could tell from his expression that he was, you know, he realized it was a serious concern. And he did tell us that there was a possibility that at any moment that we could be raided and they would confiscate all of our computers and equipment and records and so on and so forth. I mean, they've spent 7 months already investigating us. They've gone through all of our bank records. They're tapping our telephone. They're probably reading our emails. And so far, they haven't found one single thing that suggests that we're a cult. I mean, we live on a very limited budget. We do exactly what we say we do on our websites. I mean, there's no hidden agenda. And even if the people in our group who have been interrogated say there's no hidden agenda, you know, they get told, well, you would say that because we know you're hiding something. So how do you prove a negative? So at this point, we kind of wake up early in the morning at home, like, you know, about 5 o'clock, and we kind of lay there and you know, wait for the dogs to bark, or if you have a helicopter whirring overhead or something, you know. And then by the time 6 o'clock passes, because the attorney said that usually when they do these raids, they start at 6 o'clock, you know. And when 6 o'clock passes and it gets on to 7 o'clock, we figure, okay, we're safe for the day. 4 people already have been interrogated, and these interrogations have been really rough things. But what I want to tell you about is that the reason for this is that there is an organization, several of them in fact. The main one is called Middlees, and that stands for yeah, well anyhow, it's an acronym. And for 30 or 40 years, they've been active. And what they're really all about is what Art would describe as a closed system. There is some suggestion that the Catholic Church is involved, but I'm not sure if that's it exactly myself. They have a 2010 report where they have declared that such activities as growing vegetables in your backyard without pesticides is cultic activity. Using homeopathy is cultic. Yoga is cultic. Doing breathing exercises such as the one that we have created and promote is cultic. Being on any kind of special diet other than what is promoted by the mainstream media, which is big agricultural companies, even pharmaceutical companies and so forth. Using any kind of medicine that is other than what pharmaceutical companies promote is cultic. Let's see, what else? Buying gold. If you buy gold as an investment, that means you're part of an end-of-the-world cult. And this actually came up in one of the interrogations because you know, obviously for my bank records, you know that when I bought gold. And I buy gold in small amounts, but I started buying gold back in 1998, and when I could get a gold coin for $79. It's now, you know, worth quite a bit more than that, so I would say it was a damn fine investment. However, that's into the world of cult activity, apocalyptic cult. Never mind that if the world is actually going to end according to an apocalyptic cult, you know, who the heck are you going to use the gold to buy anything from, and what good is it going to be, you know? So, also, canning your own food and storing the food supplies is considered to be a cultic activity. There's been one case where a child was dying of cancer. The doctors told the parents that even with radiation and chemotherapy, the child was going to die. There was no hope. And they opted to forego the chemo and radiation so that the child could at least die without being tortured. And the child was taken away from them, and they were designated a cult. There was a doctor who developed a anti-cancer therapy, and it wasn't necessarily that he was promoting it as something that was a cure for cancer, but it certainly, you know, prolonged people's lives, and it could have been a cure, but, you know, was never allowed to be tested that far. And the president of France, François Mitterrand, was using this therapy, and he had cancer, and it prolonged his life and enabled him to finish his presidency. This doctor, 79 years old, was raided by how many? 70 gendarmes, or SWAT team, or whatever they call them. Helicopters, dogs, you know, the whole 9 yards. The old man, his wife, and his secretary were in the house. And when he went to the door to, you know, let them in, unless they broke the door down, they said, "Sir, you are a cult. You are a cult. Anybody can be a cult." Now, so what's behind this, aside from it being a closed system? Well, it's really kind of hard to say. What does seem to be apparent is that this is something that's spreading throughout the EU. This group, Middle East, has been condemned by the European Court on a number of occasions. Their response to this condemnation was that the European Court had been taken over by a cult. I kid you not. Anybody who doesn't believe the way they believe is a cult. Okay, that's the first thing. Second thing is they have teams of instructors whose job is, and also remember this, they are financed, they are funded by the state, by France, by the country, the state. Okay? But they have these teams of teachers who go around to judges, lawyers, police departments, gendarmerie, you know, military, so forth, and lecture them on how to tell if somebody is a member of a cult. Did you know that spending hours a day at your computer is cultic behavior? Did you know that? How many of y'all spend, you know, maybe more than 3 or 4 hours a day in front of your computer? Oh, you guys are in trouble. So those are among the things that are happening there, and they are spreading their influence throughout the European Union. It's very similar in a way to the Dominionist movement in the United States. How many know what the Dominionist movement is? It's like Sarah Palin and these, you know, these funny Christians that people like Pat Robertson, Jerry Falwell, Long May He Wave, those kinds of people. So that's what's going on our planet. It's overall an attempt to impose a closed system on humanity. And we have been targeted. Now, the only reason I can think of why we particularly have been targeted is because we go after our topic in a slightly different way. I mean, how many UFO groups or believers or channels or whatever do you know of that have actually had their people interrogated, been arrested, you know, been hauled in, been defamed the way that I've been defamed for the past 10 or 15 years? I mean, they're just, you know, I mean, when you try to think of anyone who has endured what we've had to endure, to try to bring together science and mysticism, you know, there just isn't anybody. I mean, they're either, you know, totally scientific and nobody listens to them, or they're, you know, so wacko and out on a limb with their, you know, weird ravings and rantings about, you know, the space boat is going to, you know, land and take everybody up to Comet Hale Lava, which whichever, comment du jour. So they don't get attacked. And this goes back to something that Jacques Vallée wrote about in one of his books, I think it was Messengers of Deception. How many have read that book? This is a really terrific book. I would say that anybody who is interested in the topic should read Messengers of Deception, because the fact that there is more to this phenomenon than meets the eye is evident, and I think that people really ought to know what it is. Well, anyhow, he gave a model for one of the ways that disinformation works, and one of those things is that if somebody starts to get close to the truth, or if there is a topic that groups of people are beginning to ask questions about, what they do is they create so much noise that he described it as being a train that is the truth. And what they do is they keep loading on the fuel until the train goes faster and faster and faster until it runs off the track. They give it so much speed, so much momentum, so much noise. So what to do with the fact that there's all kinds of unusual phenomena in our skies and in our lives, except to create a lot of noise. Scientist, I think he was a climate scientist, wasn't he? James McDonald, the one that was driven crazy. Well, anyway, he wrote a paper about it, and he pointed out that the vast majority of what we call the New Age and human potential movement is noise that was created by secret government operations to distract people from the truth, to create all kinds of theories and organizations and so forth, just to get to attract people. At the same time, they have this wonderful device called HAARP, and despite the fact that a lot of people think that HAARP is a weather war thing, I think that we can rely on the fact that most of what's going on in the way of weather and earthquakes and volcanic eruptions is probably cyclical, planetary changes that have been long predicted long ago, and they have happened many times in the past. For example, there's been a lot of talk recently about these strange sounds that have been coming into the atmosphere in different places around the world. These humming, roaring, clanking, thumping, bumping, really eerie noises, eerie sounds. And these sounds have been recorded by people, hundreds and hundreds of years ago during times of extreme planetary stress, climate stress, when there were earthquakes, when there were floods, when there were volcanic eruptions, and when there were also a great many comets in the skies. Of course, mainstream science doesn't deal with the electric universe theory, which is a lot more satisfactory and makes a lot more sense and explains a lot more phenomena than the standard theories about how things relate to one another in the cosmos. So they are basically unable to explain these kinds of things. But anyhow, back to HAARP. HAARP is evidently, I've watched these, so-called HAARP meters that they publish on the internet, and you'll notice that whenever there is so-called activity, if you start reading the news, start scanning the news, really scoping through what's really going on, news service, you find out that there's an awful lot of unusual human behavior when that's happening. So you come to some idea that this thing is designed and built to beam out thought control signals. There is some research that was being done back in the 70s where they were researching how to project thoughts or images directly into people's minds without any kind of implanted electrode being there available, and they've actually succeeded doing that. They can produce voices in your head, they can produce images, they can control your emotions, and I think that a lot of this is what is being done with HAARP, and I think HAARP can be very specific. I think it is set up so that it can target groups or individuals or an entire country. It can blanket a country with waves. I think that's what happened on 9/11. I think that not only was there the activity where they were playing these tapes over and over and over again on television, watching this, these airplanes crashing into this building. I think that HAARP was being used to set people up to program them into a certain belief system about who and what did 9/11. Okay, so that's a quick one. Now, for the people who don't know, what the Casiopeano experiment is. It really is an experiment, and the reason is because I spent many years reading a lot and researching paranormal. It was a fascinating topic to me. I spent 25 years doing hypnotherapy. Sometimes I did it privately, and sometimes I did it in conjunction with a local. Talked about having worked at Area 51 out in the desert in the western United States, where he said that he saw alien craft, and basically was kind of exposing the whole top secret alien alliance. That there was an alliance between the U.S. government or the secret government and these aliens. So we wanted to know about those things. We'd also watched one with this guy who talked about bases on Mars and having traveled to Mars and the Philadelphia experiment. What was the guy's name? Anybody remember? Who? Al Bielek, yeah. Al Bielek. And I don't know if anybody's ever watched Bielek's interview on video. That is the strangest thing I've ever seen. I mean, he sits there the whole time like this. Never looks up, never moves his hand. He's like a complete robot. Anyway, but he says interesting things. So there had been Bielek and there had been Lazar, and I had been, reading until my eyes were bleeding about this kind of thing, because I thought, this is crazy, I gotta know what's going on here. And so these Casiopean critters come along and they say, hi, we're from Cassiopeia, and I said, okay, well, what's this deal about Bob Lazar? He says that aliens refer to human beings as containers. What does that mean? And the answer was, well, containers means that all humans are an experiment, and they're using body parts and stuff, and they're making experiments, and they consume them, and they're trying to create a new race, and all this other weird stuff. And I'm thinking to myself, holy Jesus, who am I talking to? The devil here? I mean, what would you think? So then they talked about missing children, and the fact that children were tasty morsels for certain alien races. And I said, my God, I don't want to hear that. Take my hands off that thing. God. And that's what I did. I mean, there were a couple of times when that kind of stuff came up that I actually turned. I mean, what kind of channel source tells you things like that? And that's what I was asking myself. I mean, because if it's a channel source, all you're supposed to hear is holy stuff, right? I mean, it's supposed to sound good and noble and edifying, and you're supposed to hear angels in the background and harp playing and stuff. And here they're talking about eating children and body parts? Yeah! So I went away and thought about it. And I thought, what if it's true? What if it's true? This is something maybe I can check. So I started trying to find out the statistics for missing children. And I found out that there was no real way to get them. I mean, I looked it up in the World Almanac, Book of Facts, and I couldn't get anything there. And so I said, okay, well maybe what I can do, because I wanted to, the difference between children that went missing and then children that were later returned, or children that were possibly, taken by a parent in a divorce custody case. And I wanted to eliminate them, and I just wanted to stick with the ones that were never found. Nothing ever turned up. And, I couldn't get a number on this. Because all you would get would be somebody saying, oh, well, the majority of children that go missing, it turns out that, either the custodial parent, lost them because the other parent took them, or they just took on for a day and they come back. And I said, wait a minute, that's not a satisfactory answer. I want a number. So I thought, well, I can call a police department in a large city, and I can see if I can get them to give me some actual numbers, because obviously the police would know, right? I mean, they're the one who filed a missing persons report. If the report is closed out because the child has been returned, then they have a number. So I had a lot of trouble getting anything from anybody, because they said, well, we don't really know, we don't really have any answers. And then finally, a friend of of mine got a figure for me, and so I extrapolated that figure out over the entire United States, you know, I mean, by population, because it was a particular population density, and since I didn't plan on talking about this, I don't have the number with me. But it ended up being a figure so staggering that the next question was, where are the bodies? I mean, if that many children go missing, the entire United States has got to be littered with bodies. I mean, you wouldn't be able to go anywhere without stumbling over a body. Well, you know, relatively speaking. I mean, they could be dumping them in, you know, certain places or whatever, but yeah, eventually we're talking about a staggering number of bodies. Where are they? And I couldn't get an answer to this. So then I started thinking, okay, maybe they're telling the truth. And I had to really sit there and think about that for a while. I mean, do you really want to sit down at the board again and talk to some, you know, entities or whatever they are, because at that time I really didn't know anything, that are telling you, I mean, I asked a question, okay, but did I really want that answer? Do I want to do this again? Maybe I should be more careful what I ask. If you don't want to know the truth, don't ask the question. And, you know, I was going through all of this in my head, and I started thinking, well, what I really want is the truth. If this is true, we're in deep doo-doo. We've got a real serious problem. And what do we do about it? I mean, can anybody in here think of what do you do about something like that? I mean, if that's true, well, of course, probably most of y'all who have been following my work know that it's not only true, but it's actually worse than that. And what we've been doing basically is telling about it, talking about it, writing about it, and of course that's why they want to arrest me. Got to shut me up somehow. So that's how the Casiopean experiment kind of got started. Those are some of the highlights of the things that were going on. All of this stuff is written about in pretty much exhaustive detail, and it's published on the web, and it's also in the Wave books. You know, you can read the Wave on the web, or you can buy a book. You know, my belief is that we do the research, we put everything on the web for free, because I well know that sometimes the people who have the most questions, and sometimes the people with the best minds, actually don't have a lot of money. And probably because they do have the best minds and they do have the best questions. This is why, you know, the system beats them down and makes sure that they don't have a lot of money, because if they had a lot of money, they'd be one heck of a powerful source for change. So everything is free on our website, but it supports us to continue doing everything we do when you buy our books or make donations. You know, so I mean, you know, you don't have to be a member of the cult or anything. You don't have to, you know, give me 10% of your, but if you buy a book once in a while, like a donation once in a while, it helps. So that's basically what I wanted to say about the Casiopean experiment. You've already heard what Art had to say about things we've learned and things that he's figured out since then, and what they really meant by we are you in the future. It's looking more and more likely after what? It's 1994 to 2011. What's that? 15 years? 14 years? So 2014 will be 20 years? Yeah? Huh? 17 years? 17 years I've been doing this. Yeah? I've kind of run out of questions. But they're really looking, I mean, everything that's happening in our world today is stuff that they told us was going to happen. They told us that the entire planet was going to be taken over by a Nazi-like regime, and that the Nazi experience in Germany was just a trial run to work out the bugs. And of course, they talk about these things from the point of view of hyperdimensional realities, you know, hyperdimensional programs. And as Art said, you know, when you have information and organization, it isn't always good. But then sometimes what may start out bad can turn into good, because when bad things happen to good people, sometimes it changes them and transforms them and makes them, you know, rise up to situations that they wouldn't otherwise be able to deal with. It's like in the play Aristophanes describes himself, as one who constantly intends evil but ends up doing good. So what happens when something evil happens to you is a function of who you are inside. So even if there is a movement for a global New World Order, fascist takeover, total control of absolutely everything on the planet, but one thing the C did say, in concert with this, which, we see that part of it happening, but they said that this was happening because a big change was imminent. Now, this change can be consciousness, this change can be a change to our reality, it can involve earth changes as part of the transition, but, the hopeful thing about it is that it is a precursor to, basically a global kind of change. But I think that we all have to become agents of change. We can't just say, oh, well, it's getting bad because it's going to get better, let's just sit back. I don't think it's entirely that easy. I think people have to at least work on themselves. I don't know that it's necessary to go out there and march in the streets or do anything like that. I've never been an advocate of violence, but I think if people work on themselves individually, that somehow that spreads, that changes the consciousness of the entire planet. So that's the one thing that we've noticed is the Catholic teams, despite the fact that they've told us some pretty unpleasant things to have to hear and have driven us to research, to discover that what they told us was true, it doesn't, it just shows that they are actually way in the ballpark, and we have a lot ahead of us, a lot on our plates. So I think we're going to take a break now so I can start on my previously planned discussion. So let's have a short break. Can we? Yes? Here we go. What I want to talk about is the living system. And the reason I'm calling it the living system is very particular. We are all cells in a much larger entity that lives on this planet. And because we have consciousness and the ability to reflect on our consciousness that is self-consciousness, we tend to become pretty anthropocentric. That is, we begin to think that we're all the center of the universe. But we should never forget that we are part of a system. And that, we individually, unless we choose otherwise by our free will, as Art described, probably don't matter that much, contrary to what a lot of religions and cults may tell you. So, let me see if I can make this work. There's this nice little book called The Living Stream, Evolution of Man by Sir Alistair Hardy. Alistair Hardy has another theory going, which is the aquatic ape. His idea is that human beings, or early hominids, were diverted into a situation where they had to deal with a very aquatic environment at some early point in their history, like maybe millions of years ago, and this is what caused us to have some particular characteristics that are peculiar only to human beings of all the hominid-type creatures that exist on the planet. So he's well worth reading for any of you who are interested in that sort of thing. Now, life took hold on this planet between 3.4 to 3.8 billion years ago. The life that existed then is not anything like what we would necessarily call life. It was mostly something called cyanobacteria. You could say that the entire planet was just basically covered with a bacteria that actually produced the oxygen atmosphere that we enjoy today. Prior to that time, there really wasn't oxygen in our atmosphere, and other types of life could not have existed. Right here, you have Archaea stomatolyte. This is very, and what you're seeing in these bands are levels of dead bacteria. And this is like covering a very long period of time, but bunches of dead bacteria making these striations. And this is creature that finally developed, you know, and had a little hard shell cover. The thing about fossils is that they don't have much of a shelf life, and the best type of creature to produce a fossil is something that has, you know, like an exoskeleton or hard body parts. So there's probably, you know, way more than what has ever been left as fossils that actually existed, because they don't survive well. And this is a little shrimp-like creature from the Cretaceous period. And this is a kind of a gastropod from the Pliocene. This thing, you see the size is 1 centimeter, so it's very small. And attached to it is a little worm. Isn't that cute? Okay, this is the interesting thing that I want you to look at. This chart shows you the main vertebrate groups with the passage of time. And you can see here, this is 400 million years. And these are the different periods according to the way these guys name them. And each one of these, it says the comparative abundance of the different groups is roughly indicated by the thickness of the bands. Okay, so this was a pretty big one, and then right off from this came this group, which got big, and then got really small, and then extincted. This one extincted here. This one formed that one, this one, and it got really big, then it had a little period where they, you know, almost died off, and then they became more numerous again. And you see these kinds of things for all of these different types of creatures. And this is, of course, based on fossil studies. So pay attention to how this is flowing. This is important. Okay, here we have bony fish. And what you're going to notice here is the same thing, you know, that they come to being as a species, proliferate, and get very small and become extinct. And this happens over and over again. Okay, then you have a little line here. This goes to the reptiles, right? That way. So we don't see reptiles here. So here we have amphibians. And as you can see, there were quite a few amphibians that came into being and then went away. And they extinct. This is the evolution of the main groups of reptiles. Now I want you to notice, oops, sorry, go back. Notice right here, this is the group from which mammals ultimately came. See, that goes to mammals. But here you have all of that. These are the dinosaurs, right? And you see how hugely they proliferated, and then things happen, and then boom, it's gone. This is the history of the orders of placental mammals. Placental mammals are basically us, you know, creatures that don't lay eggs anymore, that they have a placenta and they nurture their young in a womb-like environment. Okay, so the common names of the main representatives. Okay, you've got anteaters, sloths and armadillos, hares and rabbits, rats, mice, rodents, lemurs, monkeys, apes, and man, which would be, oops, go back. Number 4 would be monkeys, apes, and man. These are the primates. Okay? Sea cows, manatees, blah, blah, blah. Now, the evolution of the main families of just one of the orders of the placental mammals, the carnivores. And that means you've got seals, sea lions, raccoons, pandas, bears, dogs, weasels, martins, otters, skunks, civets, hyenas, and cats. So you see that there's a bunch of them that are extinct here. They didn't prove viable. And in this one group went off here, and from it were born all these others. And you'll notice that when they draw this diagram, they put these little offshoot lines at the approximate point on the species where a new species speciated away from them. So now we have here the main groups of the anthropoid branch of the primate stock. This is basically who we belong to. And as you can see, there's a whole bunch of them that didn't go anywhere. You know? A lot of them. And somehow at the end of all of this, see how many there are? And at the end of all of this, oops. Pretty much it. Right? Okay, this is a diagram that shows a typical evolution of several species. And you can see how often they end in extinction. Anything that doesn't go extinct is kind of extraordinary. And you notice that more lines end than continue. And when they do continue, they continue in greatly modified forms. That's very important, greatly modified forms. Now, the interesting thing about this, why we're interested in this is because a comparison between a physical river system flowing downhill in space and the stream of life. The thing is that the stream of life flows in reverse. Okay? I mean, if you have a typical river system, you have a stream and another stream, they come together, and another one, and then another one, and another one, and they all go to a single source, and then they dump into the ocean. But here, supposedly, we have, theoretically, according to materialist science, you have, that accidental organism that sprang into being in primordial soup because some amino acids accidentally bumped together, and everything is supposed to come from that one creature. Now, this is a little bit from physicist. Was Schrader a mathematician too? He was a physicist, we know that for sure. Now I want you to notice what he says there. I'm going to try to catch up on my page here. Okay. What we see is that life has been highly organized and very busy for a very, very long time on this planet, almost 4 billion years. There is a definite sequence of fossils from some of the lowest layers upwards. There are dating problems for a lot of reasons, not the least of which is cataclysmic activity, which can reset dating clocks. In the charts, we see the approximate points of origin of one group from another, the reptiles from the amphibian from the bony fish, and so on. We clearly see the great outburst of dinosaurs, and that was the Mesozoic period. All the Archosaurian reptiles have been mashed together. For simplicity, they're actually 8 diverging lines. Okay. Looking at the chart of hominids, let's go back to this chart of hominids. Looking at the chart of hominids, we see that man is part of this evolutionary process. When we look at the time scale, we see that man has been here less than 1/2000th of the total time displayed in these charts. And these charts don't even go back to the entire 4 billion years, 3.8, whatever. This system has been continuing without pause for at least 3.5 billion years. We are part of a vast chemical reaction taking place on the surface of this planet. And this reaction has been modified thousands or literally millions of times over that period. And this is why we're calling it a living stream, because it looks like this river system. And the important thing about the river system is, of course, that it is flowing in reverse, and that is, it is essentially defying the second law of thermodynamics. Does everybody know what the laws of thermodynamics are? Anybody not know? Okay. Well, we'll get to it. So looking at what Erwin Schrödinger said, is that it is by avoiding the rapid decay into the inert state of equilibrium that an organism appears so indynamic. So much so that from the earliest times of human thought, some special non-physical or supernatural force was claimed to be operative in the organism, and in some quarters is still claimed. How does the living organism avoid decay? The obvious answer is by eating, drinking, breathing, and in the case of plants, assimilating nutrients. The technical term is metabolism. The Greek word means change or exchange, but exchange of what? Originally, the underlying idea is, no doubt, exchange of material. The exchange of material should be the essential thing as observed. Any atom of nitrogen, oxygen, sulfur is as good as any other of its kind. What could be gained by exchanging them? Why can't we just get born, eat once, and be done with it? What are we really getting from this act of metabolism? What then is that precious something contained in our food which keeps us from death? That is easily answered. Every process, event, happening, call it what you will. In a word, everything that is going on in nature means an increase of the entropy of the part of the world where it is going on. Thus, a living organism continually increases its entropy, or as you may say, produces positive entropy, which is something very positive. What an organism feeds upon is negative entropy, or to put it less paradoxically, the essential thing in metabolism is that the organism succeeds in freeing itself from all the entropy it cannot help producing while alive. In short, life is something altogether different from any other process we know of in the universe. It does not obey the traditional accepted interpretation of the second law of thermodynamics. So, what is life? 1953, James Watson, Francis Crick. They announced their discovery of the double helix architecture of the DNA molecule. Okay, not only that, but that was the same year that Stanley Miller and Harold Urey at the University of Chicago simulated hypothetical conditions thought, at the time, they were wrong by the way, to be present on the early Earth, and demonstrating that amino and nucleic acids, essential molecules for life, can be produced artificially from chemical reactions. It has later been determined that there were a whole host of flaws in their experiment, not the least of which was the discovery that Earth's atmosphere was actually quite different than they hypothesized. That was over 60 years ago, and there is still no proof of what is called spontaneous abiogenesis. Spontaneous abiogenesis is, of course, the idea that, some primal atoms in a primal suit bumped into each other, decided they liked each other, shook hands, and, hit it off, formed some amino acids. The amino acids bumped into each other, and somehow they formed a, primitive set. And they've gone into some real extraordinary, mental gymnastics to try to explain how you go from no life to life. And the problem with this is the laws of thermodynamics. But we'll get there. Okay. Let me get to the part where we have these options. I'm talking here about, there's a book called The Fifth Option. It's a guy named Brian Schiller. And he is writing about, did life arise from a chance encounter in the chemical soup of the primordial sea, or was it deliberately designed? Now, this guy is an engineer. And remember what we said, what Art said about engineers, that physicists theorize and engineers will make the tweak and make it work. So, I want to tell you a couple of little engineer jokes, just to help you understand the difference. See, I was raised by an engineer, which is why I think the way I think. So I greatly appreciate the point of view of this guy, Schiller. Engineers are by nature pragmatic problem solvers. Engineers take abstract science produced by theoreticians and try to see what really works in real life. They are often called upon to combine esoteric findings from a number of disciplines to find a practical application. And here's where we come to the jokes. What is the difference between an engineer, a physicist, and a mathematician? An engineer believes equations approximate the world. A physicist believes the world approximates equations. A mathematician sees no connection between the two. A physicist and an engineer in a hot air balloon. They've been drifting for hours, have no idea where they are. They see another person drifting by in a balloon and call out to her, "Wait, where are we?" The person replies, "You're in a balloon," and drifts away. The engineer says to the physicist, "That person was obviously a mathematician." The physicist replied, "How do you know that?" "Because what she said was completely true and totally useless." This is my favorite. There were the mad scientists who kidnapped 3 colleagues, an engineer, a physicist, and a mathematician, and locked each one of them in separate cells with plenty of canned food and water, but no can opener. Returning a month later, the mad scientist, he was a social scientist, by the way, went to the first cell where the physicist had been left. The physicist had worked out the angle necessary to knock the lids off the tin cans by throwing them against the wall. He was eating well, developing a good pitching arm, and knew quantum theory. The mathematician had stacked the unopened cans into a surprising solution to the kissing problem. His desiccated corpse was propped against the wall, and this was inscribed on the floor in blood. Theorem: if I can't open these cans, I'll die. Proof: assume the opposite. The engineer's cell, however, was empty. The engineer had taken apart his bed, made a crude can opener out of the parts. Then he had used aluminum shavings from the can and dried sugar from the beans to make explosives and escaped. So, let's look at the other options. The 4 other options. The first option. I'll go back. Biblical creation. God said, He created everything. All the creatures were all created at once. All of the stuff that is evident in the fossil record is just put there by the devil to lead you astray and trick you into, giving up your faith. The second option, that's spontaneous abiogenesis. That's our, primordial soup, everything coming together by accident. And notice that, they're really, the closed system people are really stuck on this. They're stuck on this to the extent that, it's actually staggering when I read the kind of stuff that I read when I'm going through this research to see how they must insist that there is nothing outside of matter. This is the whole point of it. It's a complete and utter denial of anything above and beyond physical matter. Everything has to be accidental, because if it's not accidental, if you suggest that there's anything primary to or prior to the eruption of physical matter in the universe, i.e. the Big Bang, then there's some possibility that paranormal phenomena could be something other than physical. And of course the reason they have completely dissed studying the paranormal, UFOs or any other thing, is because it's impossible. Mathematicians must be in charge. Third option, panspermia. This was come up with by what's his name? Rick Mustang. I can't say his name. And their idea was that they did some calculations, and Hoyle was an astronomer, and I think Rick Mustang was a physicist. And they did some calculations. They decided that it's just absolutely impossible, considering the odds against life, just appearing, out of magic or by accident or by bumping against each other. So it couldn't happen in the 4 billion years that our planet has existed. It couldn't. So their idea was that, okay, life was brought here, seeded on this planet by comets or asteroids or whatever. So a comet comes along and has, gazillions of microorganisms that then, they've already celled, they already have cellular machinery, they've already got DNA, all this kind of stuff. So they just basically splatter all over the planet. There's millions of them, and then they begin to create the evolution that we see in the fossil record. The problem is that 4 billion years isn't enough time. Where did they come from? Now, supposedly, the universe itself is supposed to be like 13 to 17 to 20, depending on who you ask, billion years old. So there's still not enough time for life to have evolved to the point where there would be cellular creatures that could be brought in on a comet or an asteroid. So they basically just put the problem off to somewhere else. The fourth option, directed panspermia. Well, this isn't really that much better, because that is that somebody deliberately sent it here. It didn't just accidentally happen from a comet hitting the Earth, which is kind of an iffy proposition. You know, the right comet with the right microorganisms hitting the right planet. You know, I mean, that just, you know, pushes your probabilities way out there. So the fourth option is directed panspermia. Somebody sent it here. Well, we still have the same problems, so we can't deal with that. Is that all there is? Scientific creationism. Yeah, you notice Al Gore? We have fun. The rational design hypothesis can be decoupled from religious dogma and subjected to scientific inquiry, and that's what we're going to talk about here. Scientists have been pursuing the problem of the origin of life from the materialist, gotta-be-able-to-repeat experiments point of view, trying to create a semblance of biological life from the basic elements of inorganic chemistry. This approach is supposed to demonstrate that the initial organisms that began life on Earth some 3.8 billion years ago might have self-generated under the then prevailing conditions, but without the input of a molecular biologist in the laboratory recreating those conditions, you know, running the electricity through the test tube and doing all those things, right? I mean, you know, it's completely lost on them, the fact that the only way that they even were able to make an amino acid was because they artificially controlled everything about the experiment. But not all scientists think this is how things happen. Many believe that life is just too complicated to have appeared as a result of a chance encounter in the chemical soup of the primordial sea. These scientists point out that even the simplest one-celled organism are way too complicated. Take the simplest bacterium, E. coli. It has 10,000 or so genes that represent a level of complexity that so overshadows anything researchers can hope to reproduce in a test tube that the prospect of ever doing so is vanishingly remote, if not impossible. A junkyard contains all the bits and pieces of a Boeing 747, dismembered and in disarray. A whirlwind happens to blow through the yard. What is the chance that after its passage, a fully assembled 747 ready to fly will be found standing there? That's what astronomer Fred Hoyle had to say about that. Of course, this comment is attacked in numerous ways by materialist types, including Richard Dawkins, who, by the way, isn't even a scientist with qualifications to criticize Hoyle. So, we've been through those four options. After decades of intensive investigation, the abiogenetic theories still have to yield a plausible, workable solution to the origin of life problem. Biblical creationism, of course, predates the scientific way of thinking by thousands of years. Before the advent of the scientific method, unquestioned religious dogma dictated the answers to nearly all important questions. And they're really trying to get that back in place again. Sorry. Today, religious dogma has been largely superseded by empirical science. But science has been so preoccupied with co-opting the authority of the church that it tends to lump anything with the faintest odor of design hypothesis in with religious creationism. There is certainly more to this than meets the eye. And in fact, the efforts to materialize all of science is the most corrupting influence on our planet today, initiated and propagated by pathological thinking. The fact is, to date, there has been no serious scientific inquiry into a rational design hypothesis. But as Schiller notes, design systems is not really the purview of theoreticians. It's in the realm of engineering, because that's what engineers do. So Schiller has undertaken a systems engineering approach to the study. Systems engineering concerns itself with Form. The structure, pattern, organization, or essential nature of anything, the outward appearance of something, is distinguished from the substance of which it is made. So, as we've already noticed, this living system on our planet basically has spread in the 4 billion years it's been here to every nook and cranny of the planet. It could be described kind of like as a mold on a cheese. And it has taken many, many forms, and it has basically found ways to survive literally anywhere. I mean, from the Arctic to the thermal vents at the bottom of the ocean, to the tops of mountains, to the deserts. Anywhere you look, you will find something that has evolved to live there. Function. The acts or operations expected of a person or thing. Boy, you're not going to be happy when you hear that one. Use. The act or practice of putting something into action or service. A method devised for making or doing something or obtaining an end. Intent. What one proposes to accomplish or do. Design intent. A set of goals intended to be achieved by a designer as referred to the intent of design. So it's obvious that the living system on our planet, in my opinion, is designed. The question is, what is it designed for? What are we really here for? What is really our purpose? You know, I mean, if you look at the whole living system and you just look at all of those species that came and went, and keep in mind, we could go too. We are not the acme of biological evolution, clearly. What is this system we call life? What is its form and function? What does the living system do? What is its generic purpose, its specific use that might reflect the design intent? And finally, what is the origin of the living system phenomenon? Take an internal combustion engine, for example. You can study its various parts and components and the way they are connected to determine its form. You can see how the engine converts fuel to energy into rotational mechanical energy. That's how it functions. You can examine its output, what the rotational energy is applied to, and that will tell you its use. The modifications to the basic design will give insight into the design intent. Was it designed originally to pump water, or is it an automobile engine that was designed, modified to pump water? Thus, the systems analysis will do the following. Try to identify the overall living system's objective, distinguished from form and function. Try to identify what generic use the living system as a whole can possibly serve. And try to determine what particular purpose the living system was designed to achieve as reflected in the design intent. The answer is going to be, you know, I mean, I got to go through this stuff to get it. It's really cool. So here's our question. What is the origin of the living system? Nowadays, they have kind of an anthropocentric thing about the Gaia hypothesis. The problem with the Gaia hypothesis is that it assesses the relationship between the planetary biosphere and the living system from our contemporary anthropocentric point of view. James Lovelock has devised autocatalytic models involving non-equilibrium thermodynamics to justify how life could get a jump start in defiance of the second law of thermodynamics. In short, this is really just a variation of the abiogenetic origin of life theory, despite the fact that it has been roundly attacked by arch-materialist Richard Dawkins for daring to suggest that life has a purpose. Okay, the living system. The Earth is obviously the habitat, and the living system is the user-occupied. Basically, you know, we're renting the planet. I mean, just imagine an advertisement. You know, planet for rent. You know, it's in rough shape, doesn't have an oxygen atmosphere yet. You know, it's pretty volcanic right now, boiling hot seas. You know, it's a real fixer-upper. You know, any takers out there in the living system, you know, something that says, well, you know, and also there's a warning in there that, you know, conditions can change from moment to moment. There are cataclysms that happen, volcanic eruptions, earthquakes. This is really not a stable place. You know, and then you've got a living system that comes along and agrees and signs a contract to live there. What is that living system going to have to do? What is it going to have to be geared to do in order to live in that place and survive? What do living things do? At any given moment in time, what is life activity if not the enduring challenge to stay alive, to survive at all costs? That is what every living thing strives for, and how it virtually spends all of its time, trying to stay out of the way of danger and acquire the resources it needs, such as food and water and shelter and iPhones and that sort of thing. Yet despite all such efforts, it is brutally evident that no creature, large or small, ultimately succeeds at it. After a relatively short lifespan, the only tangible evidence any organism leaves behind is in the offspring it may have produced during its brief allotted time as a living system participant. After that, it seems that an organism, any organism, has no further value to the system. If it did, we would find evidence of perpetual organism life. That's the cold, hard fact. Think about it. Can anybody disagree with that? That's what we are. We have a short life. We struggle to live that life. Of course, the struggle is made that much harder by the psychopaths in power on this planet, but even without them, that's what it's all about. We have to have food, we have to have shelter, we have children, we have to feed our children, we have to clothe our children. Some of us, want to have, other things, like I said, iPhones, TVs, cars, I mean, that's just particular to our civilization. We're still dealing with the same struggle that has always faced every member of the human species from time immemorial. This description of the living system has the advantage of being an obvious, empirical, universal principle which operates system-wide throughout the entire living system, because that's the same thing that applies to every creature. Dogs, cats, cows, horses, bears, wolves, foxes, rabbits, mice, every creature, when you look at it, I mean, if you were on a spaceship, looking down on the earth, you would see that there are all these creatures of different shapes and forms running around trying to get food, trying to metabolize something, trying to keep from being killed or eaten. And in the case of human beings, since we have no natural predators, we have our own intra-species predators, psychopaths. Machines have purposes, organisms have goals. So what is the goal of the living system? Because a machine, obviously, is made by something with intelligence to do some work. But an organism is something a little bit different. That's why the distinction between a goal and a purpose. If organisms have goals, the results must be defined in terms of achievement. The goals of safety and nourishment are ongoing short-term organism goals, while the goal of reproduction is a longer-term goal. In order to reproduce, the organism must compete with others to stay alive by avoiding danger. And this is where it's theorized by some people at the present time that higher consciousness, conscious awareness, such as we exhibit as human beings, is something, it's like a feedback mechanism that is developed to make us better at achieving these goals of survival. I mean, that's all it really is for. So, any kind of vaunted, elaborate ideas that, our higher consciousness is somehow making us better or more holy than any other creature on the planet, maybe going in the wrong direction. Well, I don't necessarily agree with that, but I'm just saying, strictly from an empirical point of view, it could seem, and it could be said, and it could be said rationally, that consciousness is just something that developed to make us better at achieving those goals, which are to get food, to have shelter, to reproduce, and to be better at it. Think about it. No? Okay, this is the biggie. We have programmed into us a survival instinct. Nearly all creatures, I would say all creatures in the living system have a survival instinct. And yet, everything dies. Why, in the name of anything rational, would we be programmed with something that drives us to survive when it is an absolute fact that we're going to die? Think about that. in this context that we can see the faculty of conscious awareness adds a whole new dimension. What is learning if not the filing in memory for future use of successful tactics and strategies of the past for helping the organism stay alive? In humans, most humans that is, learning amounts to retention and memory of concepts of mirror reality. The extent of learning success is measured in how little difference there is between what is recalled from memory and what was placed in the memory. Regarding the fact that we're going to die, surely the system could accommodate an immortal organism if that was considered desirable from the overall system point of view. If immortality contributed to the greater efficiency in achieving the design goals of the living system, surely it would be there, either by evolution or by design. From a technological point of view, there is nothing that stands in the way of genetically programmed immortality. Technically, all that is required is to expand the organism maintenance and repair subsystems, eliminating food chain participation and making the organism a photosynthesizer. So I'm going to leave you with that thought because we're going to break now, but the thing is we're all going to die, and yet we're programmed to do everything to not die. And why can't, or why isn't, or can we be immortal? Because that's where we're going. Okay? So I think it's lunchtime, is that correct? Somebody tell me what I'm supposed to do.